and gentlemen. I'm very pleased to welcome all of you to this exciting virtual event hosted by UNDP this evening that looks into Cambodia experiences and lessons learned in delivering social protection response during the COVID-19 crisis that has hit the country since the beginning of 2020. Today, we have a very diverse audience from government ministries, diplomatic missions, development partners, UN agencies partners, NGOs, universities in Cambodia, UNDP colleagues in Cambodia as well as in the Asia and Pacific region, and the general public. First of all, I would like to inform that the event will be conducted in English language. We have also prepared interpreter function that is available for this event this evening. In order to enable this function for participants who need translation, please, you will notice on the Zoom screen the globe sign with the letter, whether it's in Khmer or in English. So you can switch this option depending on which language that you would like to hear. But the main language for this event will be mostly in English. Before we begin, allow me to run through some of the important information about this event. This event is expected to run for 1.5 hours from 7 p.m. In order for us to manage this event in a smooth manner, we would like to request to mute yourself if you are not speaking. And this session will also be recorded. So for the purpose of sharing the knowledge from this session, we will afterwards upload the video in the landing page of the event and also on YouTube channels. If you have any technical difficulties or would like to raise question, please use the chat box or raise your hand function, and then we will let you know whether you are allowed to speak. I would like to also inform that all documents, PowerPoints, and the videos will be uploaded on the event landing page. And my colleague has already posted the link in the chat box. Alternatively, you can also go to the event landing page by scanning the QR code that we place on the agenda of this event. Next, I would like to quickly introduce the agenda of this event. Please allow me a few seconds to load the document. Okay, we see the document on our screen now, I believe. So we will begin the official event with an opening remark from Ms. Pauline Temesis, the resident coordinator of the United Nations in Cambodia. Following which, we will be delighted to show a video documentary that highlights social protection efforts in Cambodia during the COVID crisis. And then before we go into the panel discussion section, Dr. Ivan Gonzalez de Alba, country economist at UNDP Cambodia, will take us through a presentation about UN perspective on social protection and poverty alleviation in Cambodia. This will then connect us to the exciting part of the panel discussion, which draws experiences and perspectives on Cambodia COVID-19 responses, Cambodia COVID-19 social protection responses, the UNDP regional perspective on social protection COVID response, and lessons learned on social protection for COVID-19 responses. We are delighted to have joining us in our panel discussion this evening, His Excellency Samdech Bora, Secretary of State, Ministry of Social Affairs, Veteran and Youth Rehabilitation, Ms. Kani Vinaraja, UNDP Director of the Regional Bureau for Asia and the Pacific region, Dr. Stephen Kidd, Senior Social Protection Specialist of Development Pathways. The session will be moderated by Mr. Nick Beresford, Resident Representative of UNDP Cambodia. He will also afterwards moderate the Q&A session. And finally, we will be honored to have Mr. Luke Arnold, Deputy Head of Mission of the Australian Embassy in Cambodia. Without further ado, I would like to invite Ms. Pauline Thomasis, the Resident Coordinator of the United Nations, to deliver the opening remark. Pauline, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Nuon. His Excellency Samheng Boro, Secretary of State, Ministry of Social Affairs, Veteran and Youth Habilitation. Ms. Kani Wignaraja, the Regional Director for Bureau for Asia and Pacific, UNDP Assistant Secretary General, members of the diplomatic missions in Cambodia, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, good evening. We are all acutely aware that the COVID-19 pandemic is among the greatest global crises in the modern world. In Cambodia, the shrinking economy, hit hard by the COVID-19 pandemic, has spared no one, but has been felt most disproportionately by the poor and most vulnerable. The United Nations economic modeling led by UNDP and in partnership with the Ministry of Economy and Finance showed how social protection spending reduces poverty by more than 4%, and through a positive shock to demand improves GDP by almost 1%. Despite the challenges, I am encouraged that the Royal Government of Cambodia undertook rapid measures against the COVID crisis. In what would have been unthinkable prior to the pandemic, the Royal Government rapidly rolled out cash transfers at scale, ensuring some 700,000 households, which are about 2.8 million people, were among the poorest, most vulnerable, and those hit hard by the pandemic, to receive a level of social protection. This is an unprecedented achievement, and I am proud to say the United Nations Development System in Cambodia significantly contributed to this effort. As a fundamental human right, social protection is an essential instrument for reducing poverty and promoting inclusion. Our experience in Cambodia has made clear how social protection is not a cost, but an investment in people that not only helps prevent a spiral into deep poverty and deprivation, but also protects the economy from falling into a deeper recession. It also helps set a stronger foundation for a more inclusive, robust, and dynamic recovery. Our objective today is to provide insights and lessons from our experience in the social protection responses in the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic, as well as the contributions of the United Nations in Cambodia. In the beginning of the pandemic, the UN country team designed a framework for response and recovery consisting of 5 pillars, which is common to many of the UN country teams globally. Health first, protecting people, protecting jobs, livelihoods, ensuring sound macroeconomic and fiscal response measures, and finally, facilitating social cohesion and community resilience. The United Nations has worked hand in hand with the Royal Government of Cambodia and development partners to build a social protection system for the country to be more resilient to shocks such as the COVID-19 crisis. For example, with thanks to the support of the Government of Australia, the United Nations supplied the Ministry of Planning around 1,700 tablet computers plus software and supported training for field officers, which allowed them to quickly register families that had recently fallen into poverty as a result of the economic lockdown. UNICEF and UNDP are also working in partnership with the World Bank and GIZ to support the Royal Government to recalibrate the existing ID Poor system, the government mechanism to identify the poor and vulnerable households, to increase the precision of targeting for the poor and vulnerable people. While together we have assisted the Cambodian government and people in navigating the initial crisis, we are now faced with a greater challenge of a larger scale outbreak. This fast-spreading outbreak was a shock to the system and tested our preparedness. Curfews restricting non-essential and interprovincial movements, as well as implementing color-coded lockdown with little warning, took many, if not all of us, by surprise. More importantly, measures to control the outbreak took a toll on people's livelihoods, especially on those whose jobs were impacted by these measures. The United Nations raised concerns not only about the additional challenges created by the outbreak, but also the COVID measures put in place, which distorted markets, heightened food insecurity and malnutrition, and also increased human rights concerns with excessive use of force and lack of clear channels of communication and feedback with the citizens. The larger scale outbreak and the measures to control it resulted in a humanitarian emergency that required the United Nations country team to respond in multifaceted ways and in a more agile and coordinated manner. Guided by the UN Socioeconomic Response Framework, we prioritized saving lives and preventing further transmission of the virus. At the same time, we needed to protect and safeguard human rights by ensuring COVID control measures complied with international norms and standards. And we needed to maintain close communication with the government to facilitate a coordinated and effective approach in supporting the most vulnerable. In all of this, we made sure that the United Nations provided concrete support along with advocacy on what needed to be done. For example, on social protection, which is the topic today, UNICEF, along with UNDP and GIZ, supports the government on the analysis and estimation of the potential scale and scope of the social assistance programs required, including the identification of beneficiaries of the programs and the affected populations in the lockdown areas. We're also building capacity in the process while adapting the current IDPOR system towards an expanded social registry in the future. UNICEF, UNDP, and WFP will also create a systematic mechanism to identify who are most vulnerable beyond the current outbreak. On food security, which is very much related, on the food security and nutrition, WFP and UNDP are working on the market and economic analysis on the impact of the lockdown and other COVID-19 measures. Together, WFP is also providing options for when and how to use cash or food packages that are nutritionally adequate for the affected populations. On ensuring jobs and livelihoods for the most affected groups, ILO and WHO are assisting the Ministry of Labor and Vocational Training, the Garment Manufacturers Association of Cambodia, GMAC, employers and garment workers in the safe reopening of factories, which have become hotspots in the current outbreak. On protecting other vulnerable groups, we, the UN Human Rights, UNICEF, UNODC, IOM, and UNDP, have also mobilized to provide humanitarian assistance to the Cambodian prisons, now also hotspots in the current outbreak. We're also advocating for alternatives to detention to reduce overcrowding in prisons. There are many more examples and efforts, and all geared for the UN to respond and to help the government and the Cambodian people recover from the shocks by focusing on protecting the most vulnerable Cambodians. I just want to emphasize at this point that the leadership team of the United Nations in Cambodia is committed to collaboration because we know that we can only overcome the crisis by working together. Reflecting on the progress so far, the success of mitigating socioeconomic impact of COVID in Cambodia rests on several important factors: strengthening and institutionalizing existing social protection policies, targeting the vulnerable and those most affected by the pandemic, using technology to improve efficiency in targeting, and enhancing partnerships for sustainability. While significant progress has been made, we recognize the importance of moving toward universal coverage to guarantee income security and health for all. Measures should be put in place to build the capacity of the state and to ensure sustainable resources for progressively increasing coverage. It is important to ensure equality and non-discrimination in social protection to leave no one behind, such as in the selection of beneficiaries and the implementation of the assistance. We are as well taking positive actions to enable access by those most in need, for example, women. Together with the Royal Government of Cambodia, the United Nations is ready and mobilized to support the design and implementation of more integrated and coordinated social protection assistance programs that reduce fragmentation. We will continue to advocate for universal coverage, and we will remain guided by human rights principles to address inequality and eradicate poverty in Cambodia. I look forward to learning from all of you, and thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Pauline, for your insightful remark covering the UN support to the government in responding to the COVID crisis in Cambodia. Next, we are pleased to share with you the video documentary that highlights the social protection efforts in Cambodia during the COVID-19 crisis. We would also like to apologize in advance if the quality of the video is not very smooth because we are handling diverse participants, and also it requires broadband to load the video as well. To address this, we will also share the video afterwards on the event landing page and our YouTube channel. The purpose is that we hope the video will give you a bit of general ideas of what is going on and the UN and partner support to COVID response in the crisis. So I would like to now hand over to my colleagues who will play the video.
The COVID-19 pandemic slowed economies worldwide, including here in Cambodia. Jobs were lost, incomes fell, low earners were hit hardest, threatening to push more people below the poverty line.
So the moment COVID hit, what we realized in the most vulnerable group will be get hit the hardest. The Cameroon government start to look into our budget system. From there, 300 million were preserved. So with these budgets available, we were able to look into how to really support our family, the lowest quantile group.
Without any stimulus interventions, UNDP research estimates the Cambodian economy could have contracted by as much as 4.1%. And the number of people living below the poverty line could have nearly doubled. But thanks to targeted cash transfers to the poorest Cambodians, the worst of these impacts were averted. Economic contraction was contained at around 3%, and significantly less people slipped into poverty. The move was unprecedented in concept and scale. For the first time in Cambodia's history, about 700,000 of the country's poorest households received a vital lifeline of cash. In total, over $230 million were dispersed to meet families' essential and urgent needs. The speed of the response was also unprecedented, achieving in 3 months what would typically take 3 years to deliver, thanks to the use of technology at the commune level.
យើងធ្វើបានក្នុងមួយថ្ងៃយើងធ្វើអាចបានជាង10គ្រួសារដោយសារការបន្ទុកនេះគឺយើងចុចទៅគាត់មានកម្រងសំណួរនៅក្នុងនឹងហើយស្រេចចង់និយាយថាពេលវេលាដែលធ្លាក់បានមកវិញលឿនឆាប់បានប្រជាពលរដ្ឋគាត់បានយកមកប្រើប្រាស់អញ្ចឹងឃុំសង្កាត់រាល់ថ្ងៃគឺមាន2 tablet មួយសម្រាប់ប្រើប្រាស់ការកំណត់គ្រួសារក្រីក្រនិង tablet មួយទៀតគឺប្រើប្រាស់សម្រាប់កម្មវិធីឧបត្ថម្ភសាច់ប្រាក់ទៅដល់ស្ត្រីមានផ្ទៃពោះនិងកម្មវិធីឧបត្ថម្ភសាច់ប្រាក់ដល់គ្រួសារក្រីក្រដែលរងផលប៉ះពាល់ COVID បាទ
Cambodia's social protection system was gradually built over a decade by the royal government with support from development partners. GIZ and Australia led the way with facilitating the creation of a digital ID poor registry. UNICEF, WFP and others helped design the first cash transfer programs, covering mothers and infant children. When the COVID pandemic struck, the government of Cambodia decided to extend its small existing cash transfer program to all 2.7 million people in the ID poor system. UNDP and Australia responded by providing the hardware, training and technical assistance to help ensure this could be done in a matter of a couple of months. This has since extended to collaborating with GIZ, World Bank and other UN agencies in strengthening social protection systems in general.
During the COVID pandemic, we can see the strong cooperation is come to a real action.
Technology drove this swift response. With support from the Government of Australia, UNDP supplied over 1,700 tablets to the Cambodian Ministry of Planning.
So the important thing about the ID Poor database is that it is a database that already exists and which Australia and the German Technical Development Agency GIZ have helped to establish over the past 11 years. So when the government decided to implement a direct cash transfer system, it was the logical choice.
The app was licensed. Updates were made to the database and questionnaire so that in the future, more poor could benefit.
ក្រសួងផែនការកំពុងតែរៀបចំដោយមានការសហការវិជា GIZ ជាមួយនឹង UNDP World Bank ហ្នឹងក្រសួងផែនការកំពុងតែពិនិត្យកែសម្រួលទៅលើបញ្ជីសំណួរឡើងវិញហើយសម្រាប់ដាក់ឲ្យដំណើរការនៅក្នុងឆ្នាំ2022
The quality of our data, ODID poor data, improve. Even including the system and the quality of data. And the people, they appreciate because they are poor, we identify them. And then they come to the system and receive equity card, which can receive cash from the government. This is the very important lesson learned during this period.
Tablets were deployed in 1,650 communes. Field officers received training on data entry, enabling them to quickly register families that had recently fallen into poverty as a result of the pandemic slowdown and were in urgent need of assistance.
ការដែលការពារបានមិនឲ្យប្រជាពលរដ្ឋធ្លាក់ចុះបន្ថែមទៀតចូលទៅក្នុងភាពក្រីក្រនេះគឺជាការចូលរួមនៅក្នុងការមិនត្រឹមតែផ្ដល់ការគាំពារដល់គ្រួសារដល់ប្រជាពលរដ្ឋដល់មនុស្សសមាជិកគ្រួសារប្រជាពលរដ្ឋទេប៉ុន្តែជាការផ្ដល់ការគាំពារដល់សេដ្ឋកិច្ចទាំងមូលផងដែរ
The Cambodian experience is important. It shows that improving social protection is a springboard to accelerate poverty reduction and an investment to increase growth, particularly when the economy is suffering.
ដែលមានចាត់នៅរំភើបខ្ញុំមិនដែលបានលោកអ្នកណាឲ្យខ្ញុំម្ដង 15,200 រាល់ខែទេ
ហើយសម្រាប់ចៅទៅរៀនអីបើចៅនេះក្នុងនេះមានរូបចៅមួយនៅហ្នឹងឯនេះ
ចាចា
អញ្ចឹងចៅអាចទៅរៀនអីអត់មានត្រូវបង់លុយបង់អីទេណាយាយបានហ្នឹងដឹងប្រយោជន៍បានហ្នឹង ចា បាទកុំឲ្យកាន់បានហ្នឹងឲ្យដឹងថាហ្នឹងសម្រាប់ដល់ឲ្យទៅប្រាប់គេថាបានហ្នឹងសម្រាប់ទៅបើកតលុយចឹងហ៎បានហ្នឹងទៅពេទ្យអីបានទាំងអស់យាយអត់អស់លុយទេ
To build on lessons learned, UNDP is already piloting a new flagship program to empower people to graduate out of poverty.
The new graduation-based social protection program, I think, is an important step forward in expanding what social protection can do. Communities, families, households can become more resilient by having an asset that they can build up, a productive asset. That might be farmyard animals, that might be some micro business, and we think this is a very smart investment in terms of people's economic potential. So we're making sure then that social protection is not just about protecting people now, but providing them the wherewithal, the capacity to be able to protect them and their families as they move forward.
I hope you enjoyed the video. Next, I'm pleased to invite Dr. Ivan Gonzalez de Alba, UNDP country economist, to present UNDP perspective on social protection and poverty alleviation in Cambodia. Ivan, the floor is yours.
Oh, thank you so much, Nuon, and good evening, colleagues. Good morning in New York, and colleagues, excellencies. Let me just very quickly give a presentation. Oh, sorry. Let me just. Oops. Display settings. Let me just go very quickly on summarizing some of the findings, some of the conclusions that we had on lessons learned. Even though the COVID-19 didn't have a strong impact on health last year, it had an important impact on the economy, as the video and as Pauline was mentioning before, especially in the garment, construction, and tourism sectors. As you could see in the video, the study of UNDP with macroeconomic modeling estimated a huge impact in terms of GDP, minus 4.1%, and almost doubling the poverty rate in the absence of a stimulus. Another study from UNDP also estimated that COVID-19 and due to the school closures, we could observe a loss of 4 years in terms of Human Development Index. Another piece of evidence that we have is the informal workers survey and the MSME survey that we started last year in 3 waves, and about to begin the 4th of these waves soon. Some of the findings from these surveys is that even though the income for informal work was starting to recover at the beginning of the year in January, then we had the community outbreak from February 20th, and that may have worsened the effects of informal workers. Something very similar happened to MSMEs in terms of business demand. These are only 2 figures of that you can find in the web link below if you're interested. The government implemented a series of measures, as was mentioned in the video and also in the Pauline's welcoming remarks. Some of them regarding to health, others social interventions, and some others in terms of economic interventions. These economic interventions were either on infrastructure, but also in terms of expanding the financial options for some of the sectors. The topic today, obviously, is cash transfer for the poor families. So this presentation is focusing mostly on this. As was mentioned before in the video and by Pauline as well, this is the first time in history that a cash transfer of this magnitude was rolled out in Cambodia, reaching 700,000 households or 2.7 million people. One of the elements that helped to this rapid rollout was the adoption and implementation of electronic cash transfers. The government spent about 200 millions in 2020 out of the 1 million that 1 billion that added up in all interventions mentioned in the previous slide. So for example, this the picture that you have here on the screen is one of the families recipients of the ID Poor Cash Transfer Program, and we met them last year when we were doing a tour after the floods, and one of the lady is holding some chicken, and this is precisely a bit of the spirit of the graduation-based social protection program in terms of using the cash transfer for productive activities and to be able to escape out of poverty. Basically, as just to emphasize that this rapid rollout was also supported by UNDP. UNDP played an important role in terms of acquiring the 1,700 tablets for MOP, and that allowed them to move from paper-based data collection of the beneficiaries to digital data collection. In addition to the training that was conducted last year, UNDP is working at the moment with the GIZ in the implementation of the complaint mechanism, and we are also conducting 3 rounds of COVID-19 cash transfer impact evaluation. I'm going to say something a little bit more about this cash transfer evaluation. Is the methodology used in this for this evaluation is a propensity score matching. So it's basically a methodology that allows to estimate the impacts of treatment and control or the beneficiaries versus a population that is very similar. In 2021, as Pauline was mentioning in the welcoming remarks, we had the community outbreak that led to 3 weeks of a lockdown and the colored zones. Another study of UNDP estimated that the cost of the lockdown and curfew could reach $106 million per week, or 21.9% of the weekly GDP. Social costs are also considerable of this lockdown, and that's why the royal government of Cambodia considered the implementation of additional social assistance measures, not only in terms of keep ongoing the cash transfer that was that started last year, but also food distribution in lockdown areas and also post-lockdown social assistance programs. UNDP, UNICEF, GIZ, the World Bank, development partners, we have been providing technical support for the implementation of the targeting mechanism for these additional assistance measures. Just maybe to start closing my presentation, the portfolio of social protection in UNDP has increased recently in the last year, basically, from the graduation-based social protection that Nick mentioned it in the video, but also the ID pool recalibration project that we have with the World Bank and the GIZ to improve the targeting mechanism of ID pool in order to reduce the exclusion and inclusion errors. Last week, UNDP signed with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs the operationalization, an MOU for the operationalization of the national aging policy, and with the ILO, we are working on a project on the missing middle and the formalization of workers. Regarding data, we also have a couple of very interesting projects and innovative ones. In particular, we want to replicate the experience from UNDP in the Philippines in terms of using artificial intelligence and machine learning for poverty mapping. What you can see on the image in your left-hand side is the poverty incidence mapping of the poverty incidence using traditional data or the household survey, but then when combined with artificial intelligence and machine learning, we can get a much more granular information regarding poverty. We are also supporting the government in terms of we have in the pipeline the production or the estimation of multidimensional vulnerability index based in the Al-Qaeda Foster methodology. And we are also exploring the possibility of implementation of a cryptographic dash function social registry for CSOs. That would be a technology very similar to blockchain. Just to finish my intervention, I want to share with you a sneak preview, a snapshot of what has been the impact evaluation that we're doing in terms of this propensity score matching. We have preliminary results from the second wave, and this is information that hasn't been publicly shared before. So this is a primer on this. And basically, we have a significant results in a number of indicators: food security, child education, savings, debt repayment, etc. But then we wanted to share with you one that is very important in terms of the households having enough rice to eat. Rice, as you know, here in Cambodia is the most important food item. So their blue bar is those with the treatment, or those who are recipients of the IDPUR cash transfer program, and control group are a population with very similar characteristics who are not recipient of the cash transfer. As you can see, in basically the stars, what they mean is that the difference is significant, and in most cases, with except of urban division or disaggregation, in the rest of them, the results are very significant in terms of how the households are being able to have enough rice to eat in a significant way. That would be all for the moment for me. Thank you very much for your time and for your attention.
Thank you, Ivan, for the a very interesting presentation about UNDP portfolio on social protection. Now we would like to move to an exciting part, which is the panel discussion. Before we enter the session, we would like to hear your opinion about social protections options in Cambodia. Our colleague will share with you the poll function, in which we would be asking you to fill in 2 very quick survey questions. You have time for the next 30 minutes to fill in the to put in your answer to these poll questions. And then after the panel discussion, we will come back and look at those responses and see how that goes. I will now hand over the floor to Mr. Nick Beresford, UNDP resident representative, to introduce our distinguished panel member and moderate the session. Nick, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Norn. Very warm welcome to everybody. I just want to acknowledge also that we have UK Ambassador Tina Redshaw, who's joined us. I see we have colleagues from Russian Embassy and others. If I've missed anyone out, I should have mentioned, please forgive me. I'm so pleased to see that we have over 160 people participating in this event. We have a great panel prepared for you, and I will introduce you to them in 1 minute. And then I will turn over to questions for after we've heard from them, from you. If you prefer, please just type questions in the chat box as well. So let's go to introduce our first panelist, and that is His Excellency Samheng Boros, the Secretary of State for Ministry of Social Affairs, Veterans and Youth Rehabilitation. You saw Excellency Samheng Boros in the video just now. He's been a leading light in the development of social protection policy here in Cambodia, a close colleague with the UN partners here. And Excellency Samheng Boros, I just want to start off our conversation as follows. So we saw how this cash transfer rollout happened in very quick time. 560,000 households at first, coming up to almost 700 now, nearly 3 million people. And this was a remarkable achievement. The UN and other partners gave some help, but the heavy lifting and the cash itself, that came from the royal government. And so my question is, what are the lessons you draw from this experience, and how has this changed the perceptions of social protection within the royal government?
Good evening, Nick, and good morning, Connie, I guess. Hello, everyone, your colleagues. Can you hear me well? I guess, can you hear me well? Thank you.
We can hear you fine.
Right, that's great. Okay, so what's going on here? I think, Nick, do not making, I would say that you have to give yourself a bit more of a credit. I think you said that we did the heavy lifting, but I think the partner here, especially Arno, like Australian Embassy, have been working very hard. GIZ with UNICEF, UNDP, and even Pauline here, the UN coordinator of Cambodia, has played a pivotal role in helping support our system in Cambodia. So to answer your question, rather, what was a lesson learned, and at the same time, how does it change perception of the Cambodian people or the government itself? I believe if you actually understood correctly, I think Arno or the Australian Embassy within the video had detail about our poverty identification system. It was created in 2007, what it was. So, but the idea of creating this poverty identification system, first, it was based for just to know what is your lowest quintile is. And the target-based approach at the early beginning of the program was targeting for health equity fund, where poor family could go to health center and get more of a free healthcare. That was based on the GIZ program, very small, but we constantly developed through time. By the end of 2019, we have 2.2 million registered under this. But the program was still was not with just village chief go into household with pen and paper, and they're not updating the data. But what we're able to come in very quickly with the support of the partner, and I mentioned this, I believe in our collaboration with the UN team and the development partner. What we're able to put in and identify the whole system as a flaw, where we're able to use this as a tool to actually tackling the most vulnerable group right away, and what was needed. And we kind of like, okay, we need to advance the system to be able to allow this registration digitally very fast. We need to train our staff at the local level. At first, there is a perception where local chief or local staff are not able to carry out such an advanced system. This wrong perception, I will believe, I will allow everyone in the room here to understand this will have to change. The more we invest in the system, we invest in the training, they will come along. So we have to trust the local system, advance digitally, and train them rapidly and consistently, right? So when we're able to do this, we start with, I would say I think at the time, 2.2 million under a system. We work very fast, and we determine like, how can we actually not only target this lowest quintile? So let me throw a number at you first. 1.5 million that actually, based on our CSS data, that would be around 10% of the population. That would say Cambodia at the time was targeting right around 10% population of poverty. What we did not stop there. I think the video reflected that we did not stop there. We tried to prevent a larger group of people. So we did not only target 1.5 million people, we target 2.2 million people that were actually registered under the poverty database. However, we actually enable the system at the same time for family to actually register to be identified as poor family at the same time by tweaking the system and the questionnaire. So within a year, we're able to enroll all the way up to 3 million people. So by mentioning this, what is 3 million people look like now? We are saying 20% of the population of Cambodia. But I think Nick has projected already, while we are giving away 20% of the population, we are projecting to have only, I think the number that Nick just pointed out was right around, I think the 16% of the 13.6% of poverty in Cambodia. So we even go further what we are supposed to be targeting the lowest quintile. So this is enable us to actually protect our people not to really deepen spend their income and their livelihood into lowest poverty. Now, so what would be a good perception shift while we are doing this? I believe at first, it takes us about 10 years. We only invest in social protection. We focus a lot on the supply side. While I was trained under the ILO LTC in Italy. I was trained in many areas. It was hard for me to actually explain to our partner within within the stakeholder, within Cambodian government, that we need to put further investment. So in 10 years of doing this, we only have health equity fund as a social assistance, I would say a social protection investment. But when we start to push by the 2017, when our government start to, let's say, believe in social protection scheme, we start having a framework, we pushed it. We combine social security and social system. So social assistance itself, we started with just investment in terms of cash transfer for pregnant women and children. And be able to enroll very fast. This, I think that what Ivan just said in the presentation about $200 million investment last year, totally now is about $360 million, 3 million people, more than 20% of the population. This is almost equal to 10% of our budget, while we are saving, cutting costs from all the spending to channeling this budget into social assistance program. So the perception now has shifted. I think with the data number that have shown that we able to protect almost 1.1% of GDP fall of GDP, while we actually able to protect, I think the number that Yvonne was doing is about 2.2% of people into poverty. So this number is start to ball rolling now into more of the discussion. While we are protecting this, the economic spending, it's also how the money, all these money are going back into the into spending. And I hear say that when you give, there another perception that actually wrong, that I would not say wrong, I would say that a perception that actually still miscalculated in Cambodia, that poor family do not know how to spend their money. They would spend wrongly and not protect their livelihood. This also start to change this perception also, that these money actually allow them the power of spending, where it becomes the main source of their needs. And especially while in this pandemic, while most of the income start to cut off, start to slow down and start to limited. Yeah. So the lesson learned now, social protection investment, not only that it can allow family to be resilient, at the same time, it's also a main investment into economic also. But still, be able to change a lot of perception within the leadership, within the country, within all the stakeholders. But we still have to face rather, how do we balance in terms of budgeting or the investment, infrastructure, school, hospital, and in terms of how do we actually invest in pocket money for the people like this. So this is where I believe this is where we need to actually focus on, like, in terms of rather to channel our perception in terms of how do we shift social protection in the future in Cambodia. So this is how I would respond next. Thank you.
Excellency, thanks very much. And I'm really pleased and not a little excited to hear about how these perceptions are changing. This idea that if we empower people, they do know how to invest money properly for themselves and for their families. Social protection also as an investment, not as a drain on the public purse. It's an investment in people. And this is, I think, a really big piece of progress that has been made in such a short period of time. I'm going to turn now to our next panelist. Kani Wignaraja is the United Nations Assistant Secretary General. She is the UNDP Assistant Administrator and Regional Director for Asia Pacific. And Kani, I want to pick up a little bit on the points that Excellency Boris has been making about this shift in perceptions that really, I think that the leadership from his colleagues, as they make the case to the senior leadership within his government, how that perception is changing. I mean, how are we seeing this across the region? Are we seeing other examples that may be relevant to Cambodia, a lower middle income country, where the changing perception of social protection, the realization of the systemic changes and what these policies can achieve? Kani, can I hand over to you?
Thank you, Nick, and also thank you, Your Excellency, and also the previous speakers, Pauline and others, because you've set the stage, you make it easy to provide a comment that comes maybe also from looking at what we've listened to and learned from around the world. And into that mix is what we've learned from Cambodia. So I think it's to say that what is being tried in this country and being delivered now is part of that global learning. Let me just pick a few things, I think, that particularly from our region in the Asia Pacific, what we've seen recently on social protection systems. So first is that there is really, it's just is like with education in the early years, a really well-designed and implemented scheme of social protection that takes a life cycle approach. We see that it keeps amplifying and extending human skills and capabilities. So it's in that sense that one must look at it really as a gift that keeps giving. And that's important, I think, to center in making the case continuously to those who make decisions on budgets, as the Secretary of State said. Second, I think we've learned from many of the countries, and now we're seeing this gradually also in Cambodia, that you can spend a lot of time and a lot of effort and possibly a lot of leakage if you get hung up on trying to go for perfect targeting. And so there's a benefit to also saying, maybe if you look at large categories, you just go as close to universal as possible, without disincentivizing the will to work or the desire to innovate. So you do need to know who you want to benefit from this scheme. And different countries have taken different approaches to this. It's hard to say there's a right and wrong to it, because it is so locally context in that. But the closer one can come to universal coverage, we've certainly seen it's better. Maybe a third lesson is that there's certainly, and this I can say with more definitive base of evidence, that the myriad of ad hoc schemes do not match up to having a standard architecture and a standing architecture that provides a more kind of secure and reliable measure of delivering on social protection. And it certainly cuts out a lot of costs and leakage. And maybe two others. One is that the cash at the end of the day does go down the best, and the trust that people at the end of the day make the right choices for their families. Now, that doesn't mean that it does need to be only cash. It can and must be often complemented with other schemes. So health insurance schemes, fees exemption for small businesses, essential healthcare, education coverage. This is not an either-or issue. And that kind of, it's that collective basket, if you wish, that in our region and across the world seems to work well. And the last one is that this has to be workable and affordable over time. So this stays the course. I think the Secretary of State said we had first looked at this as 10 years. This has to go well beyond its fiscal choices and a revenue model, if you wish, that has to really be workable and affordable over time. So it's not just a give from government, but it has to be matched by a robust system of contributions a blend of public and private financing that allows it to live over a longer period of time. Back to you, Nick.
Carney, thanks very much. I like this phrase, a gift that keeps giving. And you anticipate my question to our next panelist when you bring up this issue about don't get hung up on targeting. And so I'd like with that segue also to turn to our next panelist. Stephen Kidd is the Senior Social Policy Specialist with Development Pathways. If you work anywhere on planet Earth on social protection, you probably know Stephen. And Stephen, very warm welcome. And let me bring up then this classic question on targeting versus universal systems. I mean, for a budget-constrained lower middle income country, maybe one could justify why targeting is used. But what are your views about how a country like Cambodia might be persuaded to move more towards universal systems? Stephen, over to you.
Thanks, Nick. Yeah, it's a great opportunity to come and speak here. I'm reminded from what Connie said, I think Martin Ravalian, there's a great quote from him about how poverty targeting has become fetishized now, you know, with this sort of obsession with it. In a paper, he wrote it after he left the World Bank. He didn't write it when he was in the World Bank. It would have been interesting if he'd done it when he was in the World Bank. But I think there's lots of reasons, I think, you know, about why countries need to think about universal provision. I mean, one, I think in a country like Cambodia, while we have a very low poverty rate, in reality, virtually everybody's living on low incomes in Cambodia. Virtually everybody would benefit from access to social protection. I mean, if we were to compare standards of living, for example, of Cambodia with the United States, and people say we shouldn't make these comparisons, virtually everybody in Cambodia, if we do an equitable comparison, would be in the bottom 5% of the population in the United States, which is regarded as those living in utter deprivation in the United States. Yet the United States has just introduced a almost universal child benefit, recognizing on the basis that most people in the United States would benefit from the child benefit, as I did, and I'm looking forward to my old age pension, right? So most of us who are better off than people in Cambodia benefit, and we know we benefit from access to social protection. So why should we deprive everybody else from that? And we also know that household incomes are very, very dynamic. We can't talk about a fixed group of the poor, that's a fictional construct, or the bottom 20%, because that changes all the time. Analysis we've done in other countries, for example, in Indonesia, shows that the so-called bottom 20% change every year. About 40% of people change. It's very, very dynamic. As a result of this, we can't do poverty targeting effectively. There is no country in the global south that has effectively done poverty targeting. Errors are at best exclusion errors of 44%, but in countries like Indonesia, which has spent hundreds of millions of dollars in improving its targeting system, you're getting errors above 70% exclusion amongst the target groups. So one thing, it's impossible to do. And the problem with something that's impossible, it comes out as feeling often people very arbitrary and very unfair when you're doing that. And you're in danger of undermining trust in government. That's one of the big problems, I think, of poverty targeting. This arbitrariness undermines trust, particularly amongst those who feel unfairly excluded from programs. Whereas universal provision, we've seen historically, is critical to building trust in government, building social contracts, building a real sense of the state, and ultimately you'll encourage people to pay more taxes around that. And I think the problem around many countries, I think in the global south, which are still using poverty targeting, they're kind of still following a model that we used in the 19th century in Europe, and haven't moved to this kind of modern systems that we've been putting in place in the 20th century and 21st century, which are the kind of, I think it was Connie mentioned, or somebody mentioned the life cycle systems, where we protect people across the life cycle, children, people who are unemployed, people with disabilities, old age, we all get protected across the life cycle. And that's critically important that we need to do. And just a couple of things, I know I'm going on a bit long. I think we have to really also look at some of the evidence around some of the harm that can be caused by poverty targeting. There's a really interesting paper from the World Bank from a couple of years ago in the Philippines, which has a poverty targeted conditional cash transfer program, where it shows that stunting amongst non-recipient children went up by 11 percentage points in the Philippines as a result of a poverty targeted program. It went down amongst recipients, but went up amongst non-recipients. Why? Because there was inflation on high protein foods, which meant that non-recipients who were just as poor as the recipients had to then move to rice, and stunting rates went up. So there was significant harm. Never mind, I think as somebody's already mentioned, the disincentives to work, etc., that you get from poverty targeting. Finally, universal programs, yes, they cost more, but the benefits are much more. The benefits for economic growth particularly are much more. You're going to get a lot more. We know social protection is a critical part of a sustainable economic growth strategy, and the more you invest, the more you're going to get. That's why high income countries spend on average 12% of GDP on this. Most countries of the global south have got a long way to go, but that's because it's part of their economic growth strategies. It's part of the success of high income countries. That's how they've delivered the success. And finally, it's a human right. Everybody has the right to social security or social protection. It's a basic human right. It's an individual human right. And ultimately, all Cambodians deserve access to social protection. So I'll just finish there. Sorry for the length of the answer, but it's a big topic and lots of arguments.
Maybe you think before
Stephen,
we go to Q&A, you think that could have a respond a bit? If you have a few minutes to respond to Kani and Stephen.
Excellency, floor is yours. Go ahead.
Thank you. I think I want, because we have many UNDP from around the world here. So I believe I want to give a good perception on a good mindset. How does the government side see this? Why do we not go in universal? I have been looking into answering this question for quite some time, and I believe your argument is perfectly correct. And I have been looking into detail of I think the UNSCAP has done a research earlier, how to bring everyone in Asia Pacific out of poverty. And I believe that the number was supposed to be, if every country spent 11% of their GDP, that would be everyone would be have and spend on social protection. Everyone should be out of poverty by 2030. I think that was the solution. So I believe for us, if we have a constrained budget, it's really hard for us. Let's say if we have $100 million, and we would say we want to target our whole population, for us it's really hard to see that give that same base benefit to the rich and the same to the poor. So what we do, we need to target this group as much as the highest benefit, that maybe the highest risk people first. So for me, I would suggest if we need to carry this forward, and I believe the target we want to go together is a universal coverage. But however, if you want to argue this, you have to start pushing social protection spending higher percentage. So even in my country now, within our council, social protection council, we start to allocate social protection spending in every ministry. What program that put them as a social protection program? How we look to expand this program? And at the moment, again, it's really hard for me to just say, okay, everyone get cash. We have 100 million in our pocket. When we say this, again, rich people will get it, while poor people are getting it too. But the budget is the same, where we actually distribute it to the low and high. If we're able to actually increase our social protection spending in terms of GDP, right, to the total amount, I think that would allow me to argue even further within my stakeholder to actually commit in a bigger investment. So even right now, we are focusing on doing this as we are moving forward at the same time. So that would just a quick response to this. Thank you, Nick.
Excellency, thank you very much. I am pleased also that we're having these discussions, and that so much has changed in the last year and a half, and one of the opportunities has been, and I think also to be able to look at new policies with a fresh light, and I think that gives us exciting opportunities going ahead. I'm going to ask people from the audience if they'd also like to ask questions to our panel. And before I do, I'm going to have a quick look at the poll that we gave. We asked a couple of questions. We asked if social protection is a good way to prevent people sliding back into poverty, or to stimulate the economy, or both, or not a good option. I'm very pleased that nobody went for the not a good option. So I guess it's not a representative sample, that tonight's audience, but 85% went for both. It helps the poverty numbers and it stimulates the economy. And the second question, what's the best way to deliver social protection programs, targeting or universal? And I see that we do have a preference for universal systems, 55% versus 45%. I don't know if those numbers started to shift, Stephen, after you started speaking. So maybe you helped answer B. But okay, so I mean, what I would suggest now is if anybody'd like to put a question for our panel, please, you can raise your hand, and then we can invite you to put a question. Alternatively, I can take some ones from the chat box. I'm asking my colleague Nuon if we've got some questions there that we could pick up from the chat box whilst we wait to see if anyone puts up a hand. Okay, one question I saw from Nick Booth about, which I think was actually directed to Ivan, which was how did we compare recipients of cash transfers to non-recipients of cash transfers? If everybody in the ID poor system was supposed to receive the cash transfer, how did we have a control? Ivan, maybe you could answer that question whilst we see if we have some others in the other questions coming up. Over to you.
Sure, thank you, Nick. Actually, we had an exchange in the chat, and what I was saying is that well, important to clarify that the methodology that we are using for the impact evaluation of the ID pool cash transfer is a propensity score matching, so it's not experimental. We didn't deliberately gave some the cash transfer and some other didn't. The methodology just takes the advantage of the overlap that is in terms of some recipients with very similar characteristics to non-recipients of the cash transfer. So we compare between that group when we find that overlap. Nick was asking how I mean, one of the questions is on the difference between those who didn't receive the cash transfer and those who didn't. And one element that is important to take into account in the case of the ID pool cash transfer program is the element of on demand. So not everyone actually requested the cash transfer. No. Over for the moment. Thank you.
Thank you, Ivan. Noah, do we have any questions in the chat box that I'm missing? And colleagues, please feel free to put your hand up and ask away.
Hi, Nick. There is also a question about the exclusion error of the ID pool targeting system from Bettina. I will read the question out. What is the exclusion error of ID pool targeting the poorest 20% of their intended category?
Maybe that's a question I could direct to Stephen. Stephen's been working with us on some of the social protection systems here. Stephen, what's inclusion and exclusion errors on the ID pool from some of the work that you've been doing? Otherwise, I can also ask I could ask Ivan as well. Over.
Yeah, thanks, Nick. So you put me in a difficult position here. So we have assessed it first against incomes, but not yet against consumption. We're doing that this week, but against incomes, the exclusion areas were very, very high. I think above 60-70%, and they were particularly low coverage amongst the very, very poorest. That was using the latest household survey data set. When we assess it against consumption, we might get a slightly different result, but really we're using the kind of methodology, the sort of proxy means tests in Cambodia. Nowhere in the world does it really do any better than 50% errors. But we'll give you the diagrams next week so you can see that exactly the result. But it's not surprising. It's in line with what we would see elsewhere in the world, which is pretty high targeting errors.
Stephen, thank you. Sorry for putting you on the spot there, but yeah, I mean, typically we see inclusion errors of over 50-70%. And I'm now going to turn to Pauline. You've got Pauline, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Nick. This is a question directed to Excellency Samangboro and also to Connie. I think to Boro, I think it would be really interesting to know how the government is considering the issues of sustaining the financing for the increasing needs for social protection in the context of a protracted COVID pandemic crisis. Please share a little bit of what the government is thinking in terms of financing, what needs it has identified, and how we can mobilize support. Because I'm coming to Connie to maybe put her a little bit on the spot to check if UNDP has a package of support available to help our country offices, UNDP country offices, in scaling up the support on social protection, not only on the technical assistance side, but also on the financing side and how to design those sustainable financing packages. So that's what I have for you, Nick. Thanks.
Do you want me to respond, Nick?
Yeah, oh, sorry. Yes. Excellency, why don't you start and then I'll hand over to Connie. Yeah.
All right. Thank you. Thank you, Pauline. I think this is a very good opening floor for me to actually open a bit more in terms of what we want to do next. So I think we discussed this quite a bit now with Nick and Pauline. I think Stephen also mentioned that the inclusion area or the area of the identification system may be quite high amount number, which means there are also inclusion area and also exclusion area. So for me, for our government, we also recognize of course, the percentage may be different here, but we do believe that there is an exclusion and inclusion area. So what we have been focusing on now, with discussion with Nick and UNICEF, and GIZ, of course, how do we expand the social registry? How can we look into a bigger informal worker that actually not there? The social security system now is a goal, but it's only 0.5 billion, about 10% of the whole population. And we have about 5 million of the population are under 18. So the rest are still there. About a very high number of people are still not yet in the system. So by looking at this, and this is coming to the question where Pauline mentioned about how do we look into sustaining this? Where can the support coming from? And can we do this on our own now? Now looking at this, how we allocate this $300 million into dealing with these 2 million people. At first, social protection spending was only right around, I think we projected right around 5 to 10 million for the cash transfer for pregnant women and children only. And the rest of the other social assistance package are not available. It was not. But when COVID-19 happened in April, I think the video mentioned about 2 months was ready because the data system are available. But what we did there, we have to sit all ministry down, readjust all budgeting, allocate unnecessary budget to move into social assistance package. One thing that we're able to end up with, protect our reserve and make sure also our budget are resilient to face the real concrete problem, disaster first. So from there, we're able to allocate, I think my budget are very small compared to other countries. So we're able to allocate almost 25% just to handling social protection. So But again, by the end of 2020, we did not touch our reserve. We able to maintain budgeting through the course. Now, how do we sustain further? 2021 tax revenue was still okay. We are not yet we did not drop tax revenue. Budgeting was able to be consistent. So budget also allocate also frankly is about consistent to last year. So it means that the budget spending for the same group of people are still available. Two things we need to look into now. If the economic hit further, there should be a larger amount of people should come into the support. Second, the revenue would be dropped in 2021. What would happen then? So this is the balancing act that we have to maintain now. So for us right now, we based on the projection for economic next year or this year alone, I think we will be able to maintain. We working, I think many other partner, World Bank, ADB, even IMF, they constantly staying there next to us. If any budget need loans or any are available, they will make themselves available. So right now, in a sense of protecting the social assistance program, I would say it's a good balancing act that we have to maintain. And likely before, right now, we just have a council, social council meeting just about yesterday, I think 2 days ago, and we committed to extend this program about further now. I will not announce it until we have the Prime Minister approval, but will be extended for a few more months. So then what it means now, it's the idea how to maintain this. But again, I think when Pauline asking, rather can I give the floor, I will give the floor to Kani now. How do we sustain this? And the future is already in a sense right now, we are looking into a phase out system, a phase out step. If the economic start to come back, there would be a program that will be in place. It's called a family package program where UNICEF have been play a main role in terms of helping us pushing this program. So now you see that we are phasing out into lesser support for our people. And this because of the budget constraint and also the loss of revenue if projected likely. So this will play that big key role. So now I will say that if Kani can offer any support, we love to have that. And I think Nick and Pauline know, and we work very close to each other. Everything that we do, we consider together. We follow through any support, any problem, we discuss each other. But I think that's all I can give a fair evaluation for the system at the moment. Thank you.
Excellency Boris, thank you very much. And I think we've put Kani on the spot maybe too much on this because also just for the record, quite a lot of funding came through directly from UNDP onto this social protection program, and it wouldn't have happened without support from Australia and together. But Kani, over to you for a few final remarks before I hand over to Luke.
So, Your Excellency, you certainly have put me on the spot because when it comes to Pauline and Nick, I can ignore them, but I really can't ignore you and your request. But let me speak to the financing piece of this. And I do want to take from what you and Stephen Kidd and others have said, which is that the North Star has to be universal coverage. We have learned this in country by country by country. And the inefficiencies alone with targeting could actually, ironically, provide for universal coverage. So it is a hard political choice, but let me try and make a case for why it isn't as hard a fiscal choice than we all feel in the immediacy of making these choices. Because so where's the money, right? And this is going without the option of saying, well, let's just print more money or get into unsustainable debt. So if I take those off the table, there are a few ways in which that package of a more sustainable financing approach to social protection works. And one is a politically tough one, which is what you spoke to and which Cambodia is starting to do, which is you've got to reallocate within your current budget. If I look at a number of countries in our region, just by reducing by half, not even removing, the fossil fuel subsidy, this carries a universal social protection system. It is just, we've gotten used to certain budget lines that have been there forever, and we've not questioned the extent of some of these subsidies. I'm just only picking on the fossil fuel subsidy. In fact, in many of our countries, till recently, just the subsidy to the tobacco industry, for example, was huge. So a hard look at subsidies that allows you to reallocate into social protection as an investable opportunity is a key one. The second is that countries that have put a sovereign wealth fund behind this, that blends both public and private sector contributions, has really been able to move with that kind of sustainable financing approach behind it. And the design of sovereign wealth funds done together with our partners is something that we certainly would work with you on. The third is taxing the wealthy. I see it in the chat. This is something North and South that is there. The wealth accrued by both high net worth individuals, but also of big businesses, is something where it gives you more fiscal space. Fees contributions. This again is, so it's when it is about, it works with, let's say, insurance schemes that goes in, the contributions go into the sovereign wealth fund, and that generates then the ability to keep this going. And then the last one is in all of our countries in the region, there is a significant leakage that goes both formal and informal, in fact, because of the way our systems are set up that allows money to just leave the country very quickly. And the leakage is both within the country, but also heading out of the country, just plugging those holes. I remember President Mbeki, we did a study with him for 6 countries in Southern Africa. And the leakage, the capital flight through informal means and corrupt means was so significant. It could have paid for a whole lot more than universal social protection. It could have carried universal health coverage and free public education all the way through tertiary education. That was the cost of leakage. So it was 3 times ODA to Southern Africa. And I would posit that this is not just Southern Africa, that this is part of our region as well. And so that is another, just tightening those systems and redirecting those flows also back into, and the punishment, if you wish, of moving that money and putting it into the sovereign wealth fund, again, is another approach. So Pauline's right, it's a package of things, and certainly something we would look forward together with our partners who are part of this event and others to work with you on. Back to you, Nick.
Kani, thank you very much. And when you look into all of these various aspects of how money is either wasted or leaked or poorly invested, then it really blows away this fiscal space argument. It shows it really for the sort of myth that it is. I'm going to have to wrap up, and before I hand over to Luke for final remarks, thank you very much, Kani, to Stephen, and to Excellency Boros. and to Pauline, and to everybody for joining and participating in a really rich discussion. I've really enjoyed it. I'm handing over now to Luke Arnold from the Australian Embassy for our final remarks. Luke, over to you.
Great, thank you, Nick. Excellency Boros, Assistant Secretary General Wignaraja, ladies and gentlemen, Chumrep Sur. Good evening to those in the Eastern Hemisphere and morning to those in the West. So firstly, on behalf of the Australian government, I'd just like to congratulate UNDP for taking social protection seriously and for events like this, which demonstrate your commitment to continuously improving your value add in this space. I think we've had an excellent discussion tonight or this morning, and you've, I think, together we've articulated a vision forward, and it's covered a lot of the points I was going to make. I'll make 5 very brief points in response to what's been said. I think everyone agrees on the importance of social protection and in some way and somehow moving towards universal social protection. So I'll focus not on why it's important, but on how we should get there. So bear with me while I go through 5 brief points on how we might do that here in Cambodia. Point 1, seize opportunities that are presented by the changing political economy. So I've been here for 3 years, and I was quite interested in social protection when I first arrived, but no one else really was. I spoke to a whole range of different people and about what a wide spread, large scale social protection. There wasn't much interest. We got the standard responses. It dampens incentives to work. It's financially unsustainable. The point Excellency Boros was making about some people having a misperception that the poor don't know how to use cash to meet their ends. But I think UNICEF's pilot just before the pandemic, and then certainly the pandemic, has massively changed the political economy for social protection in Cambodia. We've now seen $300 million of Royal Government of Cambodia money dispersed, and we've seen it give incredible local economic stimulus. We've seen it ensure community cohesion during this pandemic. I had the privilege of attending the launch of the emergency cash transfer. Many of you were there as well. And at that launch, Samdech Prime Minister Hun Sen said that this will ensure no Cambodian starves on my watch. And I think from the Prime Minister down, there's a growing realization that this is a legitimate way to win votes. And we should support that, that political imperative to get this right. I think we need to seize the momentum, not revert to pre-pandemic approaches, and continue to build that political support for social protection even after the pandemic subsides. I think development partners can do that in a number of ways. We can commission surveys that demonstrate the social, the economic, and the political benefits of social protection. We can promote dialogue, engage in dialogue with Cambodian policymakers, listen to their needs, and look for ways, solutions for responding to them. We can continue to provide a platform for civil society to get behind this really important agenda. So that's point 1, seize the political economy opportunities. Point 2, focus on coherence. So until recently, I think 2016, Cambodia was a low-income country. And in that context, I think the approach was let 1,000 flowers bloom as far as social protection goes. It's now a lower middle income country. It's now time for a more coherent approach to social protection. So that should, I think, involve positioning the ID Poor registry as the central registry. I think, as Excellency Boros has said, it will need to involve bringing informal workers into social protection schemes. I note that the ILO estimates that informal workers comprise over 85% of all workers in Cambodia, so it must be amongst the highest in the region. And of course, we need to move towards universal health coverage. And Kani very articulately made the point that this is not a hard fiscal choice. I think universal social protection generally shouldn't be a hard fiscal choice. Universal health coverage, even more so. The benefits of investing in health almost always speak for themselves. We can do that by expanding the Health Equity Fund benefits package, and of course by bringing the missing middle in. And as Stephen has said, the missing middle here really, they may not be absolute poor, but they're very much in need of support. So point 2, focus on coherence. Point 3 is avoid fragmentation. Now that's really the flip side of point 2, but it's really to emphasize that we're going to find it hard to see progress if we have different registers, different benefits packages, different payers. We really need to avoid that fragmentation. And sometimes development partners, and I'll admit, as a representative of a donor, sometimes we are part of the problem. And so we need to do what we can as development partners to avoid fragmentation, work closely with each other in support of the Royal Government of Cambodia's agenda. And I think UNDP obviously does have a mandate to bring people together in this space. And I think that's a real opportunity for UNDP. I think under UNDP's convenership, we might see greater harmonization of development partner efforts in this space moving forward. I certainly hope for that. So that's point 3, avoid fragmentation. Point 4 is move quickly. So anyone who's lived in Cambodia probably realizes that things generally move slowly here until they don't. So I've been amazed at how quickly things can move when they start moving. So we as development partners in particular need to be ready to respond quickly to opportunities as they arise. I've been really proud of how quickly Australia's partners in the social protection space have moved, including GIZ and UNDP. One of the ways that UNDP moved so quickly in this space here in Cambodia was through the UNDP Australia Resilience Fund, which has, I think, really been a model of adaptive programming in this regard. So stay tuned for an upcoming blog that Nick and I have authored on this. I think it's going to be uploaded to one of the UNDP blog sites soon. But that program, for those of you interested in adaptive programming, we set that up in December 2019 to support Cambodia's demining agenda, but also to respond to unforeseeable opportunities to build resilience in Cambodia. That was December 2019. Well, it didn't take long for an unforeseeable opportunity to build resilience to emerge in the form of the pandemic just a few months later. And that program was set up to respond very quickly to that unforeseeable opportunity. And it did that by supporting that technical advice that Nick mentioned to the Ministry of Economy and Finance on inclusive stimulus packages. And as Pauline and others mentioned, it also involved the procurement of 1,700 tablet computers, which, along with support from GIZ and others, enabled Excellency Boros and his colleagues in the Royal Government of Cambodia to rapidly update that ID Poor database and facilitate the inclusion of around 200,000 additional households, many of which had fallen into poverty as a result of the pandemic. So the point 4 then is move quickly. Point 5 is play the long game and invest in locally owned solutions. So Australia, we realize that we're going to be neighbours with Cambodia for a really long time, until tectonic plates move, so millions of years. That means that we have the license to play a long game here, to build up relationships and invest in long-term and locally owned initiatives. And we obviously have a shared interest with Cambodia in building stability, prosperity and inclusion here in our neighborhood. So that's why we've been investing in this space for a very long time, and why we realize that it can take sometimes a decade or more for dividends to be paid from those investments. So for example, in this space, we've been working on ID Poor with the Ministry of Planning and others through GIZ since 2010, and we've invested 14 million Australian dollars in that program, and the cash transfers didn't happen until 2020. So play a long game, and eventually, if you do it right, it'll pay dividends. We're looking forward to continuing to work with partners, including GIZ and of course UNDP in this space. We're really looking forward to forging new partnerships with UNDP through the Resilience Fund, and we also are working very well with UNDP through our Access Disability Inclusion Program, which of course touches on a lot of this work as well. And we hope that we can look back in 10 years and see that our effort has complemented the effort of others and supported the Royal Government of Cambodia's agenda, and that has ultimately led to the most noble of pursuits, and that is a state which provides for its citizens in times of need. That's our vision for the future in this space for Cambodia. And on that note, thank you very much. Okun Chran.
Luke, thank you very much. And indeed, prescience about setting up this Resilient Fund in December 2019 was indeed uncanny. That wasn't so much a long game, quite a short game, much shorter than we expected, but it was extremely effective. With that, that's the end of our program. We're a little bit over time. Thank you very much for everybody who stayed with us. Good morning to people in this time zone, and good evening to people in this time zone, and good morning to people in New York. Thank you to Pauline and to Kani, to Excellency Boros, to Stephen. Thank you to Luke, and to all our participants. And that's the end of our program. Thank you.
Thank you.